Moth's Misunderstandings, presented by the We Hate Anime podcast. This week's episode. My airplane was made by IBM and the black box is Magenta. Coop, you want to say hi?
Hello.
Hey, so Coop is an associate of mine. We met each other through Discord. We've known each other for about 2 years now. And I'm actually really happy to have him on because we have our jobs cross paths in so many weird ways that it would be a shame not to talk to Coop. And so Coop, why don't you give everybody a little bit of update? Who are you? What do you do? Those kind of things.
So I'm Coop, and I work in enterprise software. Software run by big businesses to run the different aspects of their business, finance, supply chain, things like that. So I live in the New York City area, not within New York. Everyone asks which borough, and I say no borough. But an area where a lot of people would commute via train in New York City on a daily basis, which thankfully I work remote, so it's a little bit easier than the commute. Yeah, I've worked in this industry for... Well, this is actually year number 9 now, and it's been a ride. I've changed job titles a few times, but my responsibilities in general remain similar. I work on different software at different times. The software I worked on the longest is a system to monitor all the other systems that operate a customer's business, whether it be like things like whether you can ship something to somebody because it's a restricted chemical, or it's a sanctioned party that the U.S. says you can't sell to these people, whether it's running the financial books, whether it's running how stock moves between a warehouse and shipping points. So my job gave me a lot of experience to see kind of a lot of different aspects in the way a company runs business, from individual users that are using it to just do their jobs in business to people in different technical roles.
Okay. No, I think for a lot of people, unless you live in New York and in that state, because New York is a state, New York City is what everybody thinks of when they talk about the Big Apple. New York, that is such a... I've lived in probably 5 or 6 states, and I've stayed in states long enough that I might as well have lived in them. That is such a large... difference between what life is like in New York and what the life would be like in a flyover state. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Like, I mean, have you lived anywhere other than New York?
So I actually went to university in Philadelphia area. And again, it's metropolitan area, not the city, but close enough again where you would take a train to go into Philly. So I experienced that, but New York is where I grew up and ultimately when I went back to. But as you said, New York is it's a state. It's not the city. I've never lived in New York City. I've had internships and work-related commitments, visits to New York City, and I've been to New York personally, New York City. But there's a lot of state outside of New York City. There's a lot of land, a lot of people, even though it's not quite as dense. It is different. Life outside New York City, you have a car, you have big parking lots, it doesn't cost you $40 to park for the day. It is different. Particularly there's some beautiful land up north and out west in the Adirondacks. It is different than what you referred to as a flyover state. Some people might take offense at that term, but I've actually, before I had a work at home job, I actually had a job where I traveled each and every week. So from 2013 to 2015, I did over 120 flights a year, 130 plus nights in hotels. There were some months that I spent more time on the road in hotels than I did in my own apartment or home. So it does vary, but I've worked in Illinois and Iowa. I've worked in out west. I've worked in what others might call flyover states, and there is a lot of difference in the U.S., but outside of New York City, it's a little bit more similar to what people might say the flyover states in some regards. But of course, there's a lot more nature, a lot more land. It's not quite as flat. But I've enjoyed seeing a lot of the U.S.
Okay. No, it's funny. And for the businesses you've worked for, have you ever gotten like per diem? And if you have, how does your per diem work?
So for me personally, it's varied. I've never been on a strict per diem. I do work with coworkers from other countries that then come visit the U.S. And in some of those cases, they get per diem. For me, I have travel guidelines and restrictions, some of which have become more restrictive over time to contain cost. But I'm not required to take 2 connections, 3 flights total to go one way, because the flight is $50 cheaper generally.
Oh gosh, I love
which
those.
is a good thing. Yeah, I know.
Well, no.
And
For us to give you an idea, up in Alaska, we got something called the Milk Run, which is from Anchorage to Ketchikan. That is, you have this route from Seattle. It's like Seattle, Ketchikan, Sitka, Petersburg, Juneau, Anchorage, and this is like this 5-stop thing you have to do. And it's called the Milk Run because a lot of these places, like that flight, can double as a cargo flight. Well, there's this frequent issue when we get to Ketchikan. From Ketchikan, Seattle is only, I think, an hour away, a little bit less on a normal flight. So we often reach this point where it's, we get to Ketchikan and our flight through the Milk Run is canceled. It's actually faster to fly to Seattle and then jump on a one-way flight to Anchorage than it is to do the Milk Run. Because that's, every time you sit down, you're 40 minutes on the ground. You're set down, you refuel, you get baggage off, you get people off the plane, you get people on the plane. And a lot of those flights, if you don't make that a week in advance, like, you get up every single connection and you move to a different seat.
yeah, that's tricky. I've never had to encounter that. I've had shorter connections where connections are mandatory, and I hesitate to name the town names, but there's certain big companies where they kind of run the town, so to speak. They're not in some big city like New York or Chicago or LA or San Francisco, where you have this regular commercial service. You do get commercial service, but it's connection. There's places where it's like, all right, the direct flights are from Dallas and Atlanta, and that's pretty much it. Even from New York, you can't get a direct flight, and it's not like you're flying all the way across the country to somewhere small. You're still flying, only halfway. But not quite as rural as what you're describing. I forget there's a federal program with subsidies for that because a lot of communities in Alaska need those flights for critical supplies, cargo, as you were saying.
It's the entire state of Alaska is subsidized. It's
I think it's the Essential Air Service.
Yeah, we're basically a giant post office up here in Alaska because our main export, especially now that the tourism is dead due to COVID this year, like, we're pretty much a shipment hub and we're a fishery and an oilery, and that's it. Like, we are export post office central, and we are so heavily subsidized. It's not even funny up here.
I was going to say, I've seen a lot of packages, particularly from Asia, clear for FedEx and UPS via Anchorage.
Yeah, and we absolutely do clear through Anchorage. One of the things that really cracks me up, though, the reason I brought up per diem is, well, the company I work for, which shall not be named, they had this thing for the longest time where their per diem daily, the employees were given a daily per diem, and it was basically loaded on a glorified debit card, and they would submit a report, and it goes, hey, I'm going to be out of town for this many days. I estimate I'm going to use like this much gas, like I'm going to have to rent this car at this place, blah, 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 blah. And the car rental was paid for by the company because it was corporate rates. It was, hey, go pick up a car, put it on the company account. There's a company, American Express somewhere in the sky linked to this. And you pick up the car, you get the car, you drive out. And that's how it was. And so then it was like, for how many days you were out there, you basically told them like, hey, I'm going to be gone for a week. And they then load up your company debit card with $350, and it was like a $50 a day per diem. I think before the tragedy happened, they were up to $65 a day. And so you think about that, with some people, and in my profession, that's easily 3 hours of work right there. So you're getting paid, if you work an 8-hour day, which if you fly, you're not working an 8-hour day. You're getting paid 11 hours that day for those 3 hours per diem. And so the unwritten rule that everybody and their dog in this company used was, we would get the per diem, we would withdraw the per diem, and then they just, and I wasn't part of this, I work in a different group, so I can kind of talk about this without having criminal charges put against me. They would put in the per diem, they would put it in, and then they would go withdraw it, and they would withdraw it as cash. Because they could use the debit card at restaurants and whatnot, and it would show up okay, but they would just withdraw whatever they got in cash. Everything. Every penny. And the reason they did that is because a lot of those guys, like, that was that was bolstering their salary. Like the guys who work in a hub and they were kind of like the oh crap squadron. I'm sure you know those guys. Like the guys who are like, oh,
Right.
everybody else failed. I need to get on a plane and take care of this. The oh crap squadron, basically what happens is somebody told somebody who already knew, like everybody in the company knew. It was everybody and their dog in the company knew that people were doing this and they weren't using their per diem properly. But as long as nobody spoke about it, we got away with it. Everybody got away with it. And some new hire one day asked the wrong person, well, hey, why does Johnny do it like this? And that launched an investigation, and because everybody knew, the investigation closed immediately. It was, okay, well, the new hire finally ruined a 30-year tradition, and we're all screwed now. And so what it switched to is they were now given credit cards, and the credit cards are tracked, and as long as they're used at like eateries, restaurants, stuff like that, they don't question it. And the limit is now what is rational in the city. So if you're in New York and you pay $85 for a meal, this company's not going to bat an eye. If you're in Ohio and you pay $40 for a meal, you'll be like, there was a White Castle down the road. What were you doing?
Yeah, and ours has a little bit more nuance in that. So let me take a step back. There was a couple things that you could potentially take advantage of in the past. As I said, the policy has gotten a bit more restrictive. I still consider it generous compared to what some of my coworkers and industry peers, or not coworkers, customer contacts describe. But what they did over time is they made it more restrictive. So it used to be generally nobody questioned the price of a flight, but it had to be economy. There's an exception rarely where discount first would clear at a lower rate than full fare economy. I don't want to get into discussion of fare basis codes because that would be nerd stuff. But
you and I are both gold members on, Delta. We're both gold members on everything. I'm with Alaska Airline, so like you and I get first class no matter what. Like we get on the plane.
I wish.
Well, no, but you and I get on the plane, and there's a 50-50 chance we're moving up to first class.
In the New York market, for me, it used to be true. I had a decent chance, but airline consolidation's been harder in New York. You have a lot of people with means and need to travel, industry, finance, particularly based out of New York City, all the 3 New York airports being there. A lot of times I went in 2014. When I was in 2014, I had the second highest United status, which was gold. I'm sorry, third highest, which was gold. So it's silver, gold, platinum, 1K is the highest United status. Unless you spend like 20,000 plus a year and some crazy amount of miles, they have what's called global services.
Well, yeah, but in Alaska, it's the million mile club. The moment you hit 1,000,000 miles in your total lifetime, which I think took my boss 30 years, from that point on, you're pretty much first class for the rest of your life.
For United, you have to hit 4 million, and then you're pretty much first class for the rest of your life.
Jeez, that's still, whew.
It's a lot of miles. Even with, I've done hundreds and hundreds, well over 700 flights since 2012. I still am like nowhere near million miler on United. Part of it's that I had a lot of shorter connecting flights.
Yeah.
Part of it is that I switched from US Air when I moved from Philly to United.
Yeah.
And anyhow, but yeah, in New York, there's a lot of people that travel. So like even when I was flying to Houston and I had platinum status, there's so many people that would travel to Houston United that I would be number like 35 on the upgrade list. And there's only 12 seats in first. And a lot of times in New York, there are people willing to pay for those seats.
Yeah, you're not making that spot.
Exactly.
Out of curiosity, just a quick personality question for you. Let's say you get your dream spot. You get first class, or you get on the plane. Are you a window or an aisle guy?
Aisle.
Okay.
Aisle domestic. Now you put me on a long haul flight, like I would even classify, depending on the time of day. I would even say New York to LA is long haul, and United does do service with lie flat business seats because the market from New York to LA supports that, or LA to Boston. Transcontinental people go late at night.
Oh yeah, by the way, for people that don't know, there is actually a seat above first class. They just don't want you to know that, but there is actually an area past first class. You know what I'm talking about, right, Coop? Like that is business.
Yeah.
So just for people who don't know, first class isn't the best. Business is the best. If they ever piss you off and they reschedule your flight, just ask to be upgraded to business then, and you won't get pissy. And a lot of people will actually do that for you, and then you basically got yourself $1,000 upgrade for free.
It depends. The nicer you are with the rep, and you have to be nice but firm, it can work. It depends on the airline, depends on your status. There's a few factors, but you never want to pull the, let me speak to your manager card. I demand this. You just have to be polite but firm.
Dude, every time I fly with Lufthansa, though, like, that business upgrade is so tempting. Because, like, you hit New York, because I think I hit New York a lot of the time, because I think that's one of the flights out to Germany. I hit Lufthansa, and we visit family a lot of the time and whatnot. And I get there, and that business class upgrade to go from main cabin, which is where you can have like 5-7 people in a row together, which is a nightmare, to just there's like there's 1 or 2 seats, and that's like it's a $2,000 upgrade. So you're sitting there and you're just like, please screw up my flight, please for the love of God screw up my flight.
Kind of, and I've done that, and it's long. And in 2016, I flew to Germany from New York, and thank God I didn't have the connection where you're like midway and you're already dead tired. But that flight's at the evening to give opportunities at other points in the U.S. to connect and get people there to New York to go further onward to Germany, Frankfurt, which is the Lufthansa hub, or one Lufthansa hub, the major one.
And then they put you on the small carrier planes once you hit Frankfurt.
Right, exactly. If you're going that far, I mean, you might do Munich. That's another option, but Frankfurt's the biggest option. Anyhow, I paid for an upgrade, and I said on the way back, you're kind of gaining time against the sun. It's not as bad. The flight's in the morning, and you still land. It's like 3 o'clock. You go to bed early, but it's not that bad. Like in the afternoon. Sorry, yeah, correct. 3 p.m. in the afternoon. But you go on the way there and you leave in the evening, and when you arrive it's like 7 a.m. and it feels like it's like 1 a.m. for you, and it's like it's crazy. It's a long flight and you're tired. You want to start your day energized. So I was on United and I did a miles plus copay upgrade. Now $550 is not an insubstantial amount of money.
No, but when you're on an 14-hour flight, it is a godsend. People do not realize how bad, like, when you rationalize, because, like, a lot of the time, same thing with your cell phone, like, do I want to pay 99 cents for this app? But as somebody who's had to sit dead middle, in the dead middle of the plane, in the dead middle of the middle row, with kids, and, like, obnoxious kids, like, first world American kids on either side of me, like, $500 does not sound bad at all in that moment.
Right, and I think it's experience. A lot of people are nervous about flying. You get up and somebody's offering you a 5-course meal and, all the alcohol you can drink up cabin. It's helpful. Unfortunately, I did do that upgrade, but then the plane was canceled due to mechanical, and there are way more people displaced from, the 30-plus person business cabin than so the people who paid for business got rebooked more quickly. People like me got put back to economy, but at least I got economy plus with like 3 extra inches of legroom. But I would say I don't want to go on plain nerd talk for too long.
No, this
modern
is fine
economy,
because
modern economy is tough though, because what you describe, a lot of planes. So when I flew to Germany, and it was ultimately a Boeing 757, and on that plane the seat count is 232, so it's 8 across, but it was designed for that. What's happened with a lot of planes is the Boeing 777, for instance, was designed for 333 for everyone to be comfortable, and all the airlines, due to profit, economic reasons, they found a way to make it 343. So you have these armrests that are supposed to be 18 point something inches wide, and they're like 16.8 instead. So you especially if you're a bigger person, if you're short and you're a small person, that's fine. Pitch is a war that economy is already lost, but fitting in that extra seat costs so much in shoulder to shoulder space. And you have I think it's the A350 or A340, I can't remember. That plane was designed at 8 across. They designed that Airbus so you couldn't try to put in a 9th seat and it's a very comfortable plane. It has a lot of shoulder to shoulder width, and when you have that width, it's not so bad to let the middle person have the armrest.
No,
But now,
that is the courtesy. The middle guy gets crapped on, so he gets the armrest. Though now with
right.
COVID, there is no middle person.
Right, and exactly. And it used to be, a Boeing 777 was designed to be 333 as it shipped, like about 18 inches wide. But they found a way to fit in a 10th seat. And I can tell you, I've flown that plane both ways on a long-haul flight. 333, I flew that in Cathay Pacific, is a way more comfortable configuration. It's very claustrophobic, 343. And the worst part is you're in the middle of that plane in a 343 combo, and there's two middle seats. So if you think about it, 343, on one side and the other side, the middle seat is the middle seat. In the middle of the plane, it's two middle seats to the four seats. So they're 40% middle seats. So you have basically, it's not quite 50-50. It's 2 out of 5 odds of being in a middle seat. And it's not a fun ride with the reduced armrest. And, you fly in a 3-3 plane, the aisle guy, the window guy, give the middle guy the armrests.
Well, now
in the middle of one of those big planes. Now there's two guys in the middle, and they fight for their own middle armrest, and it's awful.
Yeah, no, it's here's something, because and really, we're talking about plane talk, but do you realize you and I are in a very rare career where we actually have to fly all the time? Like a lot of people, even PhDs, I mean doctors, a lot of those guys, they might fly twice a year for a conference and a training. Like you and I, we work in jobs where we actually fly all the time. Like it is an essential mode of transportation for what you and I do. So it's fine because we're giving people a view into a world they don't know. And when we're talking paying $500 for an upgrade, sure, that sounds god awful, but really fly, please fly 4 months out of the year. Have 4 months of your life where you earn Hilton Diamond status and talk to us, please.
It's very difficult, and I will say this. I am not traveling as much as I used to. Last year, I only did 8 flights, but as I said, 2012 to 2015, or 2013 to 2015 rather, I did over 120 flights a year. And usually some point, your schedule would dictate a different airline. And I am Marriott Lifetime Titanium, which is the 75 night a year level. You can't even earn that anymore after they merged with Starwood. I earned it in time. But the lifetime criteria for that was 2 million points and 750 nights, and I earned that. I joined Marriott Rewards in 2012, but I didn't travel very much in 2012, only the last 3 months, and I earned that within that time. I earned that in 2018. I hit that status, so it's different when you have to travel each and every week, and you know exactly which security line's best, and you know that you look at the seat map and you know that the Boeing plane here, it shows a seat in front of there, but it's not real, and it's basically an exit row with no seat in front of it.
With no seat in front of you, and you're like, give me that right now.
I'm ashamed to admit this. So, U.S. Airways no longer exists. I don't know how many people flew U.S. Airways, but U.S. Airways and American Airlines merged to become, quote unquote, the new American. Right. Anyhow. But U.S. Airways was the dominant carrier out of Philly, and American is now by virtue. But American Airlines ran a different IT system, so I think this is kind of a good story. This is not something I ever directly worked on. It's something I interacted with. Right. So different computers for IT, for hospitality, things like airlines and hotels started way before everything else. There was a lot of money in it, particularly for airlines. Well, it used to be a very manual process.
Wasn't it the stock exchange that really hit it? I think even before airlines, the stock exchange was tracking with computers.
They did. I mean, money has always incentivized technology, right? Banks with technology. Nowadays, I would say banks are less innovative. They're more just willing to spend 10 times as much for something stable. But computers and banks and airlines, wherever the money is, that advances technology, right?
Yeah, and you remember DARPANet, right? Before the internet. Well, you probably don't remember DARPANet, but you read about DARPANet, right?
Exactly. I never used DARPANet. First online experience was with America Online as a kid, but
you want that CD? I got 200 of them in my back room right now. You can have 200 of those CDs. You can have 12,000 hours free 56K dial-up.
Look up, yeah, I could use some dial-up, but look up. Somebody made a throne out of AOL CDs.
Actually, real quick before you finish, do you know that like when DARPANET was a thing, there were, I believe, 5 universities that had some form of central internet. And you have to realize, like when we're talking about internet right now, it is significantly different back then. It was, you pretty much had this cable route that ran, and it probably ran along like the telecom lines, and you pretty much had to have a direct line through switches to the other locations. Like this is how these switches worked. Fairbanks in Alaska, 300 miles up the road from me, north, middle of nowhere, gets to -40 in the winter on a good day, was one of like the 5 universities to have a network connection. And like the others were like MIT and Oxford.
Times change. It's funny. It's funny where those things started and where they invest in technology. I don't want to mention the university, but my older sibling went to university that a lot of people wouldn't recognize off the top of their head, although it's pretty prestigious. And they actually invented. They had their own intranet.
Yeah.
This was after DARPANET, but they had their own intranet. They came up with their own mail client and protocol because it was kind of before POP3 was standardized,
Yeah.
and they actually used that until the mid 2000s.
I hate POP3 so much. My company was still using POP3, I think, until about 2 years ago, and we finally got to the point where they're like, "Fine, you guys can have an Outlook."
Yeah, I mean, IMAP works pretty darn well, but in the corporate world, Exchange is so integrated with Outlook, it just works very, very well.
Yeah.
I do like Gmail as my personal mail. I have my own domain, Gmail for your domain. Before they started charging for that, I got it for free, so I'm grandfathered in on that. And I
still
love
got my
Gmail,
GeoCities.
but in the, you know, I forget what I have. Oh, it used to be members.aol.com. They shut that down. But yeah, anyhow, yeah, I got my website somewhere on one of those free domains.
Yeah, so you're talking about economy, travel, airplanes, the story you're not proud of. I want to hear this story you're not proud of, Coop.
Okay. All right. So this relates to the topic of conversation, which is kind of this is not tech support. Maybe it's somebody who's used to tech support knows assumptions somebody might make while designing a system, or more accurately, shortcuts, right?
Yeah.
People take shortcuts. You're stressed. This is quick and dirty. I'll come back and I'll fix it later. So airlines were the first ones, or some of the first ones, as you said, DARPANET, stocks, etc. They were some of the first to invest in IT. So what they would do when they wanted to invest in IT, they said, this is a crazy process. It used to be you called American Airlines and they said, okay, where do you want to go? What dates? What's your contact info? And then they'd go to a giant file cabinet room. They'd pull out basically what were index cards and look for schedules and try to reconcile what would be sold for and the inventory. It was extremely manual. There were times you had to go back and say, yes, there seems to be inventory. Can I get your payment information? And they go back again before they charge the person or sent an invoice. And they'd say, sorry, the inventory is not there. You couldn't price accurately. And it was horrible. Nowadays, airlines price very dynamically based off of algorithms and actual demand. They see trends like, people are booking tons of flights for this because maybe a convention's announced. Rental car companies saw it with the solar eclipse. I think that was like a couple years ago, where people are trying to follow the line of the sun by renting cars, and they jacked up the prices, much to everybody's chagrin. Anyhow, so airlines invested in IT. American Airlines actually went to IBM and they said, please make us a mainframe system that can be a centralized reservation system. And sometimes that's weird because they're like, 18 characters for names ought to be enough for everybody, like, full names, first, last, middle, and then people in different cultures have different lengths of names. Some people nowadays sometimes have second middle names or second last names. And those 6-character, they call them like PNR, person, number, record, or record locator. These are all hard-coded assumptions, but everybody coded around them in different ways, and now we all kind of have to live with the assumptions of the past, the limitations of the past. Some of this was done for, computational space, memory, etc. Anyhow, so American came up with their own system with IBM. They called it Sabre. And
You want to talk IBM? We could talk IBM.
I'm sure we could talk IBM all day, but I
Well,
have more to talk
let me
about
ask,
IBM.
Let me ask if you were put in a room and just like the CEO of Compaq and the CEO of IBM, this is 1989, are in a room and you got a gun and you have to shoot one of them in the head before you can leave. Who would you shoot in the head?
Hypothetically,
Hypothetically, like, I'm not saying, like, I'm not condoning the murder of somebody, but I just want to see which company you disliked more in 1989.
in '89,
You know, before both you and I were born, so, you know.
I'd say probably Compaq.
Really? I did not expect that.
Yeah, well, IBM is a difficult one to try to peg. IBM for me has a lot of good and bad. There's definitely some bad in there, but they've had other influences on the computer industry. Right now, I'm kind of ambivalent on them, and I actually people don't realize this. It's not in the corporate world. It's not quite as so simple as saying, oh, you know, well, either this guy made the hardware, the customer, and you make the software. It's not like, you know, you buy a Dell computer and you buy, you know, whatever company software.
No, your Dell computer is manufactured by 7 different brands in Thailand. Like, it's not even built by Dell anymore half the time.
Right, but like when you set up a really complex application or like an environment, you might have like 5+ companies involved between how it's set up and understanding how the business needs to use it and legally run it. So I've worked with IBM in a way where it's not the customer was running even IBM hardware. And, you know, I've had varying experience with them. I have to say I've worked with some very, very nice people from IBM. In recent years, I question where IBM's gone a little bit.
Dude, I was questioning where they were gone in like 2005 when Lenovo was hovering over them.
Well, I don't know how bad or great that was. I think it was a loss for a computer enthusiast that the ThinkPad brand got sold to Lenovo.
Yeah.
But IBM, I think, correctly decided that in general PC sales, they correctly and incorrectly decided. Let me put it that way.
No, they
So
were absolutely
IBM
correct because the quality in which Lenovo was producing computers does not work in today's brain-dead consumer economy. Computers now are serviced to the lowest common denominator, and if you can give somebody a $350 brick that can run Facebook, can run Twitter, can do very light image editing for their Instagram, can play Minecraft, they're happy. But that's not a computer. You and I both know I wouldn't trust that computer to save my life.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference. But the market moved, you know, the market matured. You know, IBM came up with some fantastic innovations. And there's a great story by one of the inventors of the ThinkPad that you can read. They have a column online. And there's actually a really good story that I'll relay on that. But you know, IBM came up with a lot of innovations to make the ThinkPad, and some people had to break rules along the way because IBM was a very rules-oriented company.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know,
everything was proprietary. In fact, did you ever watch like Silicon Valley?
I have not watched the TV show that much, no.
Okay, never mind. I was gonna say, like, because Gavin Belson, like the contracts they make their people sign that they go to like court over, it just sang IBM to me when I was watching the show. I was like, holy crap. So,
yeah,
sorry.
it's no worries. But IBM did a lot of things. People look up the butterfly keyboard for the ThinkPad. That was just innovative. They even came out. I think Lenovo came out with the dual screen laptop, which is kind of scratching your head why, but at least it followed in the spirit of it. They kind of cheapened the brand. They came out with the SL ThinkPad series, which, in my opinion, are not worth being called ThinkPads. They build quality change in general. Some of that is consumer demand. They still make the P series ThinkPads, which I still consider ThinkPads, but some of the driver, hardware, software quality has fallen a bit. But my story about the original ThinkPad that I was going to tell is they made this, and the invention actually goes back to us talking about airlines. They realized that there was no really good laptop to use on an airplane tray table. And what the problem with that is laptops really before that point either used an external mouse, which was good working at a general table, but you had to plug it in, that didn't work, or you had to use a trackball, which added this gigantic lip, like,
Oh,
when
yeah.
I say gigantic, and people don't think of what that means, think of something the length of like your phone, like an iPhone, from the bottom of the space bar to like the lip of the laptop. This is gigantic in the 90s.
Oh no, it's massive. I mean, when we're talking about the very first laptops, like you and I remember this. We don't remember it, but you and I have both done research and we've seen this. The original laptop was a briefcase. You literally folded the keyboard on top of the screen and you just carried it like a briefcase wherever you went.
Exactly. And then by the 90s, they got to the point where you could have a portable laptop that you could open and flip open and use on a work surface, and it had a battery. Battery didn't last a crazy time.
No, but and I mean, and we're talking about running what, 4 kilobytes of RAM right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was the Osborne. I think the Osborne was the first portable computer.
Right. So it evolved over time, but what became basically briefcases, you said, that flipped open, that had like people imagine there are phones with larger screens than the first laptops, quote unquote, portable computers had. They didn't call them laptops then; they called them portable computers because you weren't putting this 20-pound behemoth like briefcase on your lap or like a tray table. But even when they got to laptops, what they called them, which were later notebooks, because the processors got too hot and they didn't want to suggest that you're gonna
put them on your lap because that cooks you.
Yeah. They didn't want to say cook yourself. They didn't want the liability. But they came up and they said, well, there's no good design to use on a tray table. And the ThinkPad design was actually inspired by a bento box, like they package out of Japan. This is true. Look it up.
Okay.
I am not lying.
I'm going to just be like IBM bento box. Actually, I can't look it up right now. Fun fact, and we can talk about this later. I liquid cooled my PC, and due to the way I liquid cooled it and the fact that the DD5 pumps are not as powerful as you've been led to believe, for some reason I think I killed something, and my web browser causes my computer to crash. So I got to be very careful looking stuff up when I'm interviewing people.
That is an interesting set of circumstances to cause your PC to crash.
Dude, I will tell you the whole story when we get into the tech support section, but go ahead and finish it. I'll stop interrupting now.
Anyhow, I was gonna say, and I'll try to make this short because we've been going for a while. They came up and they said, "What do we do to solve this problem that you can't use it on a tray table?" And they said, "We're gonna use this pointing stick in the middle of the keyboard." And they came up with that, which was brilliant. But it was black. The keyboard was black with white lettering. The laptop was black, and it's a great aesthetic. But you lost where to put your finger. And what they said is make it sing. So they made it bright red. But the IBM rule at the time was the only thing that could have a bright red coloring, or red at all, was the emergency shutoff switch for a mainframe. So they buy this part, they get it from, I don't know where they sourced it from at the time, maybe different from now, where you can get like basically a piece of rubber, molded rubber. But they classified it as dark magenta, I think, or light magenta. And they got a call from a parts guy. The guy is like, "This is a red part. You can't do that." And they're like, no, it's magenta. And he's like, "This is against the rules." It's like, well, why don't you talk to your supervisor, they said. And, the bet was that there was so much bureaucracy at IBM, and this was a number of decades ago, that nobody would do anything. The guy wouldn't be willing to actually do it. Sure enough, they were right. So it ships out, red part, huge press coverage. And as it turns out, they find out, the IBM execs find out, and they're mad, but all the press is like, "This is brilliant. This is amazingly designed. This is the best laptop." And, it was like, well, better to ask forgiveness than permission.
Yeah, and it worked. IBM, that's why I asked, like, Compaq and IBM, because Compaq is the antithesis to IBM. It said they went out of business because they were responsible for a lot of the things tech companies do today. The fact that there's, like, break rooms with food stocked in it, decent working hours, stuff like that, like the ability to actually like sleep on the job if you're in crunch time. That's all because of Compaq. Like, that's why I asked, like, Compaq and IBM CEO. Sure, Compaq died and IBM has gone on to be a great back-end support, but IBM is a joke. Like, historically, IBM has been a joke in the tech world of like the slave driving hellhole.
What? I want to be careful about my words with IBM. To be clear, I'm elsewhere. But IBM is not what it once was, and Compaq coming into HP is not what it once was. Although I think a lot of that was some destructive decisions in that merger process.
Okay. So before we go full into tech support from hell stories, and I know we've wasted this, do you have any like airplane stories that you can recently think of where you're like, please God, somebody kill me? Because what you think? I got one that you might like. So for a while, I used to play my PS Vita on flights, and that was back before Sony really cracked down on the censorship. So there were games coming out on the Vita left and right that like you did not want to play in public. And I made that mistake. I was flying my milk run actually from Ketchikan to Anchorage, and I had a game on my PS Vita called Trillion: God of Destruction. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but the main concept is the end boss is there, and you basically are trying to keep him from getting to the bottom level of hell. And the game's part management, part dating sim, part RPG, part dungeon crawler. It's actually a really nice mesh of gameplay, but it's definitely a niche audience kind of game. And I was playing it, and I'd been playing it, and I hadn't been paying attention, and a mother and her daughter, and I didn't realize it because I don't look at people. You don't look at people on flights. You don't want to talk to people. You got your Bose headphones on. You don't care. But the daughter was like highly autistic and fidgety. And I wasn't paying attention, and I'm giving these people their privacy. And I'm playing, and like, it's a JRPG, dude. Every girl is beautiful eye candy. It's not a question. And I'm just sitting there playing through the game, and all of a sudden I just hear, "Titties! Mama, he's got titties!"
Oh my God.
And I look over and I'm like, I actually freeze, because I'm like, oh no, because I'm just in one of the cutscenes where they're like talking to one of the characters. I think I was talking to like Lust or Wrath or something, because each of the characters is based off the 7 Deadly Sins. And I just freeze dead. And she's like, "Mama, look, he's got titties like me." And I was just like, no, this is my nightmare.
Oh my God.
So I just looked at the mother and just hit the home button on my Vita without saving and moved over to Tomba. I was like, I'm not dealing with this.
Oh my God.
That was like my I want to die story.
I don't know if I've had something that bad, but I will give you one where I was kind of embarrassed. So, as I said, I traveled a lot from 2013 to 2015. In 2015, I had to do a lot of connecting flights, and the logical connection point at that time was Chicago.
Yeah.
So I went through Chicago O'Hare, the main airport in Chicago, quite a bit. So that's a United hub, which is why I switched to United for flying. But they're also at Newark. But anyhow, it made sense for a variety of reasons. But I'm going through, getting my second flight, I'm going back home. It's Thursday night. You know, the flight back is always, you're more tired, but you're more hyped. So I don't want to get too boring on planes. It's a Boeing 737. It's a former Continental plane. They have paid direct TV on it. So you have a screen in front of you, but you got to swipe your credit card. If you prepaid rather than swiped on the plane, you know, like they compared if you like pre-authorized it, it was $5 instead of like $8. So it's like, all right, you know, this flight's like 2.5 hours long. Worth it. So I swiped the credit card. And I'm actually going to watch some TV rather than sleep on the flight home. Somebody sits down next to me. They're standby last minute in my economy plus seat. And I'm like, hey, you know, whatever. And I see his significant other up a couple rows, fiance, wife, girlfriend, I don't know. Cute little dog. They put on his seat. And I think, oh, that's cute. So we're going to taxi. And I'm looking at this TV. And all of a sudden, you know, it starts channel up, channel up, channel up. So I just tap the guy on the shoulder. He's in the middle seat. It's like, hey, you know, you're leaning on my controls. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, don't worry about it. United doesn't know how to design planes. You know, they put in these slimline seats.
Oh, no.
And, you know,
Coop.
like, the control is at the front of the seat. So basically your elbow is designed to go on the volume controls. And he laughs and was like, okay. And I leave the guy alone. A while later, after I get the drink service, I pass him the drink. He's like, thank you. And I'm like, I talked to him a bit, and I'm just like, oh, yeah, you know, I travel a lot, you know, United's cool, you know, it's just like, but they do some silly stuff, and, you know, like, they ordered these Airbus planes, and they got, like, these gray seats that were uncomfortable as hell, and, like,
Coop,
I said, I consider them torture devices, and, you know, I was like, so the Boeings are way better, this aside, and I asked him, like, how do you take the dog on all these trips, and what I should have realized, and this might be a slight spoiler, but I think you kind of already got from where I was going in the tone. What they have what they call non-revenue passengers, which is after all the paid passengers board, including people who ask for standby. One of the perks of working for an airline is you can take yourself and some family and friends as a non-revenue passenger and take up the last seats, because it's basically free for them to put you on that plane. The incremental fuel burn is nothing. Anyhow, so this guy was non-rev, and I'm bitching about how United designs planes nonstop. At the end of the flight, I get there, and he's like, well, hope you had a good flight. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, if you're ever near the Willis Tower, Sears Tower, I think it's the Willis Tower now. I'm just like, oh, Jesus God. And he starts opening his wallet, and you see the globe on the back. And for those of you who don't know, the globe is the United logo. And he's like, well, let me know, and I'll take you on a tour. And I take it, and I say thank you, and I shake his hand, and then I turn the business card over, and obviously I'm not gonna say the guy's name. Job title: cabin systems engineer.
Coop.
So I felt so bad at the end of that. I basically shit talked a guy about how their planes are badly designed to his face without being aware of it.
Oh, that's like, I mean, I got stories about that where I mentioned like a really rare disease like prions disease, and I'm like, yeah, people who get prions disease are probably bad people, and then like somebody next to me is like, my younger brother died of prions disease when he was 12, and I'm just like, oh gosh. So I know exactly what you're talking about. The last one actually from me, because we'll wrap the plane segment up now. Yippy dogs, teacup yippy dogs. They're always terriers. They're always like little poodle mixes. I don't like yippy dogs, which sucks because two of my favorite breeds of dogs is the Papillon and the Schipperke, and they're both really small. But and I'm gonna be a little bit racist here. Asian women have ruined these dogs for me.
I think the problem with those small dogs is anybody who does, the problem is that size of dog and that a dog that cute, you never train fully. And a lot of people let the dog get away with murder, like yapping nonstop. If you teach the dog at a young age that, making a fuss with noise is not acceptable. Some dogs are noisier than others, but the problem is a lot of those dogs, they get taught they can just bark whenever they want rather than training them, hey, bark when there's something to be excited about or alert about, rather than bark at everything. And another aspect is sometimes those small dogs don't get socialized properly, like to humans. Then they get socialized to other dogs, and then they don't know how to react when they're in a crowded environment like a plane. Oh man, and that's a shame because that's on the owner.
Yeah, no, and it's so I'm sitting here in I was Anchorage heading out to my location to do a job, and there's a woman sitting there with like a yippy little teacup. And things growling and barking at everybody. And I'm like watching as I'm playing my cell phone game, getting my random rolls. And I'm noticing that she's like encouraging the dog to growl at these people. Like, yeah, that's a good girl. That's a good girl. Like, oh, yeah, you show that mean man. I'm like, oh no. Well, she gets on the plane next to me, and the dog is sitting in the middle row between like her and somebody else. And the flight attendant comes by, and I hate this. This drives me nuts. She goes, ma'am, the dog should probably either sit on your lap or go in his little carrier under the seat. And she looks at the flight attendants without any like humanity in her face, and she's like, no, that's okay, he's an emotional support animal, so he doesn't have to follow the rules.
I hate that, and the problem is, I do have a dog that I could get in that definition.
Oh, I've done that before. One of my previous apartment complexes wouldn't let us have pets. So my wife, who has depression, we wrote up the script for her. We had a doctor sign that she had depression and that she was empathetic towards animals, and that's how we got a cat in the apartment. And we never got our safety deposit back, but we got the cat. So I know what you mean.
Like if I had to, but I've never been that badly, even if I have to travel, like I've driven. Some people abuse that. I think the example that a lot of people remember is the emotional support peacock on Delta.
Yeah, no, I definitely remember that. And the reason I bring that up is on my flight back. I noticed that there's, and this is why I said like I'm gonna be racist and mention Asian ladies, because of course there's two Asian ladies in their like late 40s, maybe early 50s. And one of them has two of these little teacup yippers, and one of them has like, and they're like the poodle mixes. and the other one had a Schnauzer mix. And I'm sitting there going like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. And these things, once again, not trained, spoiled as can be, wearing like, sweaters that cost more than my entire work outfit. My work outfit requiring me to wear cool pants at some point. Cool being a huge manufacturer of like durability pants. And I sit down on my flight, and sure enough, in the row next to me, because I'm aisle, I love aisle, the woman with the 2 yippy ass teacups sit down. And then I'm like, okay, well, whatever. And then, sure enough, the other woman, the only other woman with a dog on the flight, sits next to me. And I'm just sitting here, I'm like, well, I'm in hell. This is hell for me. I'm in hell. I did this to myself by complaining about the previous woman.
One thing I've learned with airlines is never complain, like even monologue in your own head.
It will get worse.
Things could be worse. It will.
Yeah.
Like how many delays can I get? Well, I will say there are a couple times I missed the ball. I did get upgraded a couple times to first, due to an oversold situation beyond like what elite status allows, just by being nice at the rep. But like a lot of times, you do 120 flights a year. You're gonna be on a couple times where just flights are outright canceled. You got to find a hotel.
Yeah.
You're sometimes. The worst I had was in 2013. And the prior day, American's Airlines reservation computers went down. They couldn't board people for flights for over 5 hours. So everyone was rebooked on other American flights and other United flights at O'Hare. But there's also bad thunderstorms that next day after that. Like, that American's computers went down. And it took for 1,000 miles. That sounds like a long time to drive, which it is.
Dude, are you kidding me? I don't think you understand. Like, on a daily basis, I can drive 460 miles. Like, my average trip, if I have to go up to Fairbanks, that's almost a 700-mile trip. And so, like, I leave at 5 in the morning, get there just before noon, work for 5 to 6 hours, and then 6 p.m. rolls around, I'm driving back home to 1 a.m. Trust me, I know driving.
I trust you on that. But for a lot of people, 1,000 miles sounds like a crazy length. But, New York to Chicago, normally that flight is about 2 hours. Actually, they usually say 2.5 hours coming back from Chicago to New York to allow for padding for flight time to say it still arrived on time if there's some ground delays or whatever. Anyhow, but it took me to get to Philadelphia, just similar length in New York. It took me from leaving and arriving at the airport at 10 a.m. with one connecting flight that was 26 minutes long. It took me, I left at the hotel at 8:30, and I got to the airport at 10. I had to stop in between, but I got to the airport at 10, and I didn't get home till 3 a.m.
Yeah.
And most people were getting rebooked like 4 or 5 days later.
Oh, yeah, no. And that is absolutely, like, you rent with National or whoever, Enterprise, and you tell them, like, hey, look, I'm dropping this off somewhere else. Like, eat my entire booty hole. I'm out of here.
Yeah. Actually, I had a lot of older coworkers who told me about having to do that on 9/11. You just were like, oh, yeah, I'm, like, driving around the area at the airport, and then you just took that. You drove from Phoenix to, like, Philadelphia and just dropped off the car and said, hey, not my problem. Get the car back there, charge my credit card, whatever. I had to get home.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're good with plane talk, just because we've been talking travel for 53 minutes, and I'm going to have to rename this episode. Moving forward a little bit, we're going to talk about IT. Now, the difference, a big difference between you and I is you are on the back end. I don't know if I would call you systems administrator. Would you say you're tier 3 support? Like, what would you say your official job title is?
It's like a mix of tier 3 and like, so it's a little bit odd. So I do work on software. So you have like people who work that don't develop it. You have people that develop it. You have people that primarily deal with the customer and kind of insulate the developers a bit. So I didn't write the code, but I deal with it each and every day. And As I said, I worked on a system. I kind of moved to some other software, but I still get dabbled in here. But the main thing I did for the number of years was I worked on a system that hooked up to other systems. Now, to be clear on what system means, generally the systems that you monitored like they worked to run the customer's business, number one. But they're distributed, so it's not, people run an Excel or Chrome on their laptop. That's one thing. But this application was designed to run with database server. So you had a database server that ran whatever database, IBM DB2. Oracle, Microsoft SQL, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you would have several servers that ran application code, one or more. It could be all the same server where it was all in one, but generally productively, it was at least 3 servers that did the actual end user logins and ran, what logic the user was doing. And sometimes it was upward of 40 for the larger systems. And that could be sometimes one system out of over 50 that ran at a customer between the productive environment. And what people don't understand is you do a lot of testing in enterprise to make sure your changes don't break stuff. So sometimes you had what was called a 2-tier environment where you had just development and production. You had a 3-tier environment, which was development where you break stuff, quality where you took some more time testing it, production where you ran your business, 4-stage, which you added between dev, they called it stage, QA, prod, like another layer. And then, of course, you had test system sandboxes that were copied off prod. But, it's very, very rigorously tested. Anyhow, so this system that monitored everything else sometimes hooked up to over 400 different applications. Bearing in mind, sometimes it was, 4-tier, like 5. We call it 4-tier, but, you had the 4 tiers plus landscape, this sandbox in the test, in the landscape, so 6 total. But you would still have 400 different systems and over 1,500 different servers running operating systems hooked up. So I got to deal with everything. When I say everything, I mention the database platforms, operating systems, different flavors of Unix, Solaris, AAX from IBM.
All 7 layers of the network.
All 7 layers of the network, because you had these agents and connections between the systems that monitored how they ran. Quirks within the application themselves, quirks on my end of the application. A lot of times I was given, okay, here's the database password of production, with the data of a lot of people, like under guard, of course.
Yeah.
Here's the operating system. Here's the logins to different applications with restrictions. Figure out what's going on. So I've kind of been
Have fun,
everywhere and anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, actually, right after I started, I didn't know this system in college. You wouldn't deal with it in college. So I get hired, and then it's like, all right, well, there's this new type of system that basically nobody's hooked up. And so here's the Oracle DB password. Here's the Solaris OS login. Here's the login to the application in development. They just upgraded this totally new version. They haven't set it up at all. And have fun.
Yeah.
And that was a trial by fire to learn how it worked. What is an Oracle database statistic? Kind of crazy.
Yeah, my favorite is we do the trial by fire a lot of the time with our new hires at my current job. We'll walk them into a room, an X-ray or a CT or an MR room. And we don't walk them into MR because we get in trouble if they get stuck to the magnet and stuff like that. But we walk them in and we're like, hey, the system's not taking exposure. Figure out why it takes exposure. I'll be here if you need me. And then I turn off my phone and I leave. And we do that because that's what happened to us. Like, hey, let's see if you can figure out how to do your job without any directives. And it is just it is the worst thing you can do to somebody, but we absolutely do it. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
They basically left me alone for like 2 weeks with no guidance to like get it done. And I got it done, and it was like, oh, good, you got it set up.
Now here's your next job.
Here's the next job. Exactly. That is exactly what happened. But it's been really interesting, and when you work in one system, one application, even when I say application, people think like, oh, I run Excel or whatever, and the larger system can be like, there's all sorts of areas, and you have like a project can involve dozens of people with different like business background. So like it was very interesting to work in an area where you had to kind of talk to everybody.
Yeah. And so it's the reason I asked, like I said, I really needed to emphasize the fact that you and I are on completely different ends of the IT spectrum. What I did is I kind of was lied to because I was trying to avoid college, and so I got my A plus, my Net plus, and my Sec plus. Which, hearing that, you and I both know that's a joke. Like the A Net Sec plus certifications are a joke. The military uses it for some reason. Like anybody who goes into CyberSec has to get Sec plus, but like it is the easiest test to cheat on the planet. It's the dumbest test on the planet. Hell, I think in 2020 they still ask you questions about Microsoft Vista. It's like, when do we even use that? But it's, I should have gone for CCNA and all that, but I certified the crap out of myself, and then I got a job fixing computers at Best Buy on the Geek Squad, and then I jumped to a local repair shop for a long time, and then I ended up, after that, I ended up now working with bigger systems that are still glorified computers with parts that can kill you. So that's where I am. That's like, I was PC repair. I'll tell you, there's not a hardware, firmware, software related issue on a computer I can't fix. And so that's like a completely different world than you, though.
It's
so
different.
Yeah, and so one of my stories when I was working at Best Buy is we have this. There's this unspoken thing. I'm going to tell you right now. If you bring your computer in to a shop for repairs, we know what your fetish is by the time that computer leaves. Like, we know everything that is wrong with you. And sometimes, sometimes we don't care. Like, we fix the computer, it's great. But if we start noticing things that are weird with computers, like, we absolutely dig. And we're in our right to dig because, and this is the story as to why, is I got a laptop in one day. It was a satellite, a satellite. And
Toshiba,
yeah, Toshiba. I was trying to remember. I was like, I swear Toshiba is the company I hate because I swear my nickname for Toshiba is Toshitty. We got a Toshiba satellite in, and the mother's like, this woman comes in, and she goes, yeah, so computer not work good anymore. Can you fix it? And that's the vaguest situation on the planet. I mean, it's a 2-year-old satellite, so that's why it doesn't work anymore. Thank you. In fact, Toshiba computers were so bad at one point, they didn't even use their own hard drives in their computers. They used a different company's hard drives. Like, how bad is it when you can manufacture your own hard drives and you don't even use them in your own computers? Because the failure rate is so high. But,
absurd.
So we get the computer, and right away, like, I know something's wrong. I boot the thing up in the back room, and sure enough, there's a bunch of, like, weirdly labeled pictures. There's a couple of weirdly labeled videos. So the first thing I do is I turn the sound off, and I just open up a random video. And I'm like, sound is definitely off. Like, I went into Device Manager and disabled the sound driver. And I open it up, and I take one look at it, and I'm like, huh, that's child porn. So I go to my boss, and I go, hey, can you look at something for me for a second? And my boss comes in, and actually he was the warehouse boss at the Best Buy at the time because my actual boss was gone, but he had worked Geek Squad for years before he became warehouse. And he comes in, and I'm like, hey, can you tell me what this is? And I pull up the video again, and he looks at it, and he goes, huh, that looks like child porn. I'm like, yeah, it does, doesn't it? And I mean, so it's so soul-crushing when you have to be 100% certain. But we open up a couple of pictures, and I think we opened up one other video, and, like, there was no doubt in our minds that this was not okay. And so I look at him like, so what do we do? And he goes, well, we file a police report. And so we file a police report, and the cops are basically like, okay, don't fix anything. I think they copied, like, all the data off the computer. They're like, don't fix anything. Give the computer back to the mother, or this woman, because we have data on here. So we called in the woman, and we basically had to identify the woman to a bunch of plainclothes cops. I had to pull a Judas and point her out in a crowd so they could get her. And I had to say some very specific things, like, and luckily a lot of this sounded like I was checking out a computer for her, but it was stuff like, ma'am, your name is Maria Bonsai or whatever, and you're confirming this is your laptop that you are picking up. And I had to say this, and it sucks because I never did customer facing. I was always in the back. And she confirmed it, and right as she confirmed it and took the computer from me, a plainclothes cop, like, placed his hand on her arm and was like, ma'am, can you come with me? And I think they took her to the back. I don't know exactly what happened, but she stayed in the store for some reason. And they interviewed her, and what we ended up finding out is the woman had a daughter with Down syndrome that just downloaded everything she could get a hold of. Like, what I didn't realize is there were, like, 40 free-to-play browser games, like those things where it's like, oh, you can play the first 3 levels of the demo for free, and then you have to buy it. like that computer was chock full of stuff that like the kiddie porn was only the surface layer. Like that computer was completely covered in crap. And this, we find out it's a little girl with Down syndrome. The mom doesn't even know like, any of this. And so it became a situation where like this sting basically became, everybody just went, oh, like, what are you going to do? Are you going to prosecute a 15-year-old with Down syndrome? Like, so they had me nuke the computer from scratch and then give it back to the mother and just be like, hey, can you make sure your kid's not looking at child porn anymore?
Yikes.
Yeah, that was one of my stories. And I don't know why, but all of like, and you know what this is, like, all the stories end with, and then I found weird porn.
I used to do, before I did it like, professional, which is what I was talking about, full-time job, direct deposit paycheck. I used to do front-end user support, but it's different doing it for people on an ad hoc basis and like, some small businesses than it is doing the situation you described where anybody can walk in off the street, right?
Yeah.
But I don't have that many interesting end user stories. I generally dealt with family and friends. I had to tell a couple people, like, depending on what year it was, Firefox, Chrome, whatever, like, there's a private mode.
Yeah,
you can use that, or
Control-Shift-N, thank you.
Yeah, or a Control-Shift-P in Firefox, or before that was a thing, it was just like, here's how you wipe your browser history.
Or, like, have a default browser and then use Internet Explorer to look at the porn.
Save it in the homework folder, whatever. But anyhow, I don't really have any interesting stories or thankfully anything that dramatic. But dealing with business was interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Speaking of the homework folder, in 2006, I had a buddy who, he brought his laptop over for like, I don't remember why, because there weren't a lot of games that you could play, but he had his laptop over, and we found his homework folder. And this is 2006. This dude's homework folder was just photoshops of Emma Watson's head on various like porn stars that had a similar body type to her.
Oh my god!
And that's just of all the stupid stories, like just because Emma Watson was, I think, still underage at the time. Like I think she was 17 or something. But like, so of course it wasn't actually Emma Watson, but it's just like these poor, horrible photoshops of Emma Watson's head, and I'm like, I looked at him like, please tell me these aren't your edits. Like, please tell me you found these edits. And this was like back when 4chan was first getting big. So he's like, have you ever heard of a website called 4chan? I'm just like, go outside. Go outside and think about what you did. Like, put it in a zip folder with a password or something. Like, come on. So yeah, sorry, you're talking about dealing with the businesses.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. When we did end user for businesses, it was interesting. You go somewhere and in like 2012, and they're still using rack mount drives, rack mount computers with IDE drives that are running like NT5, and in that use case, it's actually pretty interesting. So stevedoring is the business of unloading and loading container ships,
right?
Which a lot of people don't know. And longshoreman is the job title of the people that do that. But at stevedoring, companies go and they do that, and they run these big cranes, and these cranes have tons of moving parts, motors, electronics, relays, wiring, etc. And certain companies will make what they call the programmable logic controls, or PLCs, for them. Now, this thing, look, it's like you have this gigantic crane. You go up 15 feet of ladder. You go in an elevator that you shut the door and you can barely see anything. And then all of a sudden you're 100-something feet up in the air. You have to go up another 15 feet of ladder to go into the main room of the crane for an electric drive crane. And by the way, I'm not great with heights.
No.
Planes are fine. But like I'm like in one of those wire mesh climbing up a ladder, I'm like crapping myself.
Are you one of those Call of the Void guys? Like, are you the guy?
Yes.
Okay, so
yes.
I'm
like, why don't I? What if I just jumped off?
Yeah, it's. I'm not even afraid of heights. It's just my desire to kill myself just accelerates on a rooftop, because I'm like, I think of it Assassin's Creed, like, could I make this jump and then just walk back in like nothing happened?
I'm like, what scares me is like, it's like, what if I fell over, and then I think and visualize of what that would be like.
Yeah. And so it's yeah, no, I know exactly where you're coming from because I have to deal with a lot of roofs on hospitals, so it's pretty bad.
Anyhow, but I get up in this room. The PLC is something that looks like a PS1 sideways mounted on a rack. And you go and you look at it, and it's not impressive. And the best thing you're getting out of this, it's like you think of like the display in a cable box, where it's like you know how it would draw like an 8 for the clock,
Yeah.
and you might get like a C or an F or a D out of it.
Yeah.
It's like that, and this thing has so many electronics. You do that, there's like binders the length of like a library shelf, 3 length wide. That would be like this is how you troubleshoot it.
Oh
But
yeah, wonderful.
The manufacturer had an option. You had it hooked up to this specialized server that hooked up to the PLC, and it would read a bunch of data that it didn't say in the face, and it would be like, all right, these are the like 5 most common circuits to check or whatever. Like, or like things to do. Like, you know, go to binder 11, tab 8, page 32, and just tell you right where to go.
Wait until you get into the wiring diagrams of some stuff. That's even better.
Here's the thing. The wiring diagrams were actually good. The problem was there's like fucking a million of them. So the computer told you which ones you had to look at.
Oh, no. My issue is a lot of wiring diagrams, and I think this is universal. They just don't tell you if something's AC or DC. And in some systems, you would think, like, hey, it's AC into the wall, and then eventually we're going to hit a converter, and then it's going to go to DC, and then I just have to measure DC from here on out. Fun fact, if you're measuring a DC circuit and you're not measuring it to ground, you're going to spark. And so when you have wiring diagrams that don't tell you what's AC and DC, and you're measuring a DC circuit as if it's AC and you got your contacts on both lines, and suddenly your multimeter flies across the room, straight up garbage. Sorry.
Mega rip.
Yep. So I know I can empathize with you.
Anyhow, but their concern is the computer works. And I'm like, all right, this thing is NT4. God knows what year, NT5. God knows what year they got installed. And it's just like, well, here's the thing. So the manufacturer of that PLC is tricky, right?
Yeah.
Anyhow, the manufacturer is tricky, and they do a lot of things to the Windows install that are not standard in any way, shape, or form. Basically, you just try to install Windows and try to put this on. It won't work. They do all sorts of weird fucked up shit. Like you can't even run check disk. This is a FAT32 file system because they had specifically marked bad sectors.
No. So we won't say the name of the company because it's my parent company. But I learned the hard way when I brought one of their MRIs down that you can't check disk their version of Windows because they've pretty much in-modded it to make it network safe. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think we have the common name in mind, but
yep, and we're not gonna say it because I ain't getting fired because of my podcast.
Exactly. So anyhow, so I have to deal with this. So I know the drive's going, and it's like, all right, let me get some IDE drives, and I was just like, well, this drive's gone, right? Like it started to boot into Windows, it was gone. And we went to the main tech support number, and they went on about how much it would cost to have this. They said you have to ship the entire rack mount out of the crane.
Yep.
And ship it back to us.
You know, we have.
It's going to cost so much money. It was an insane figure.
Was it in a RAID, by the way, or was it just one drive?
Single drive IDE.
Okay, yeah, here's what you do. You order the entire thing, and this is just for future reference. You order the entire thing like they tell you to, and then you go grab the one component you need out of it, put it in the old one, and then write it off as DOA.
Well, we actually figured out something easier, which was to call a different country. And they're like, oh, yeah, we can ship you the drive.
Yeah.
So they just shipped us the drive free of charge, and then we bought a bunch of IDE laptop-sized drives. You know, you have the hot swap key, the hot swap bay.
Yep.
You just, hey, it's cheaper to have 4 hard drives and have the thing be down. So, you know, cost of a crane being down could be hundred thousands, millions a day. So
Yeah, no, literally, and I know exactly what you're talking about. So it's nuts. Um, I'm thinking like IT stories because it's with me it's just always I would be I can only tell you the story where the punchline is, and then I found porn so many times before it got ugly or before it gets boring. But I remember I used to do network support, and so something a lot of people don't know is there's a good chance your ISP doesn't actually have a dedicated tech support line because you know the terms tier 2 and tier 3, right, Coop?
right.
A lot of the time, the only tech support that ISP has is tier 3. A lot of the time, it's tier 1 and tier 2 is contracted out. And so when I was living in Utah, and I have no issue talking about these people because I hate them to this day for the crap they pulled on me. Basically what it was is 40 ISPs basically paid us a contract. It was like, hey, we'll give you, say $2,000 a month, which is cheaper than hiring, 4 full-time staff guys. And you figure like 40 companies at $2,000 a month, that's 80 grand a profit a month. And then you're paying guys like me, we're walking out with less than $1,200 a month doing this kind of stuff. Like that boss was seeing, $35,000 overhead. Like that's how much he was getting back after all expenses were paid. This was lucrative as hell. So basically 40 ISPs, we just did tech support for them all day, every day. We got as my shift was ending, we would get Australia. But the worst places to do IT support for was the trailer parks. And I'm not going to crap on somebody for like living in a trailer park because it's you live where you can live and you survive where you can survive. But like we did ISP work for an ISP that also provided user email addresses. To get onto the internet at that trailer park, you had to have an email address and a password through the trailer park, and you could we could pay $40 a month to use their internet, or you could pay like $2 that day to get onto that router and have 24 hours of browsing at a lower speed, stuff like this. And we would get calls all the time, and this was the worst thing. Their emails and passwords were in a plain text file that just updated daily. So, like, you would just hit Control F, and you would just scroll down, and you would find, like, these guys' passwords. And it's so dumb. It's like, just give them a reset password option. No, you have to tell them their passwords. So I'd be in this trailer park, and this guy would call and be like, sir, what's your email address with Trailer State Beauty Gardens, or whatever it was called? And the guy would be like, oh, it's Jim Jelpers or something. And I would go look it up, and I would have to, like, verbally read out what his password is to coworkers next to me, like could hear. I'd be like, sir, your password is dog fucker. And I just,
oh man.
So the things these people do, it's nuts. I think it would be best if we wrapped it up tonight. I'm definitely gonna have to rename this episode, and I'll go over episode titles with you. I'm thinking like my airplane was made by IBM, and the black box is Magenta.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, because
maybe I can give a couple anecdotes to the front end user support before I left that, and then maybe we can save the back end user support for another episode.
Dude, tier 1 and tier 2 it is a war zone. Like, it is the meridian between like two warring factions right there. And meanwhile, tier 3 is just in the back in their commander's tent, like, oh, look at them die.
I do have to say, I worked with some people that lied tier 1, but I didn't do tier 1 day in, day out, 8 hour. I did it casual job, family, friends of friends. But I will say, being on the end user side, as like somebody who deals on the back end side, I recognize, troubleshooting, being forthcoming. I am not the most graceful person. I went to a university that used to have a mandatory laptop lease program where basically, as part of your tuition, it was included that you had a laptop issued by the university.
Oh, no. Okay.
It was kind of fine, but they manned in the middle all our traffic.
Great.
Which has a story I don't want to mention here because it's too specific. But let's just say they watched for keywords, and my roommate mentioned certain keywords in IM, and this was 2008, and it was at a time which, IMs were plain text.
Yeah, no.
If you ran the network, you could see what was going on. So there was something that was IM that was misconstrued by the people with the monitoring, and some uncomfortable conversations where it's like, no, this is something totally innocent. Kind of like the story you said earlier, but I don't want to get too specific there.
Yeah, no, it's.
But,
I mean, I could tell you embarrassing stories where I didn't know that my father was monitoring all network traffic in 2006, and I learned the hard way. So yeah, no, I know.
No. I totally understand it. I didn't. Thankfully, my parents didn't. I kind of ran the network to some degree, so I had some understanding of how all that worked. But anyhow, different times. But I dealt with a lot of that stuff, and I dealt with people. So I kind of, as someone who deals with front end users, I'm sure when you interact with support and stuff, you say, used to work for a company in Utah that did, ISP related work. I'm sure when you have to call a cable company, because you don't control everything, you do all the troubleshooting you can, but certain trouble you have to call a cable company or whatever.
Yeah, and you just call them and you say, look, these steps have been performed, follow your tree down to this level and tell me what I have to do next.
Exactly. And where I was going to go with the leased laptop story was they did lease the laptops, but they were Dell Latitudes. Not amazing quality at this time. They had the Quadro G90, whatever the ones that were like destined to go up in flames because they were badly fabricated.
Were these
they had the
dual
BIOS
cores?
Updates. What?
Were these the dual cores, like the first line of dual cores?
Yeah, so they're like the second line of dual cores, but it was like 2007, 2008 they came out with these, like the D530, 630s. But the NVIDIA chips in them just blew up, and they just pushed out BIOS updates to make the fans run longer, to delay it until it was out of warranty.
To set the thermal throttling lower, stuff like that. Whatever they could do.
Right, exactly. And then, they still blew up. But, so they're kind of huge pieces of crap. But one nice thing was we had certified techs on site, and that were working for a university, and I just went in, and this is my freshman year. I just I got my pizza from the dining hall a few 100 feet away. I got my soda, they were out of lids, and I just knocked the damn thing over. So I go to the tech support desk, and I'm like,
well, if it was code red, it runs faster now.
Exactly. Well, no, red makes it overheat. I think the fan guide is blue is cool, green is FPS, red just adds heat.
Yep.
Something like that.
No, green is eco mode.
Green's eco mode, right. But I just went up there, and I'm just like, I said, guys, I can make something up, but I just spilled about 20 ounces of Pepsi in this thing. And they just laughed, and actually it was ready 50 minutes later. They replaced the board, they replaced the keyboard, which had the pointing stick in it, and the drive was fine. But they're like, yeah, nobody ever tells the truth, so thanks.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's and that's actually what I tell a lot of my customers. I'm like, you could tell me the truth, just don't tell anyone over the phone what the truth is.
Well, it depends. It depends on what the context is. For me, I solve a problem in software, so the fix is the fix. Hardware, there's a bit more nuance in it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's it's trust me, I know exactly where you're coming from. I'll wrap it up just for people, because I know I've brought it in. Liquid cooling your computer is however much your computer costs. So break down the parts, because you got the CPU, the motherboard, the GPU, the RAM, the hard drive, the power supply, the case. $1,500. I would say for an average good computer that you can liquid cool the whole build is about $1,500. And at that case, you're buying a 2070. You're buying right now at the time of recording, you're buying a 5700 XT. You're buying maybe a 2080 or 2080 Ti. If you actually get up to the 2080s, a lot of manufacturers actually sell a pre-cooling designed GPU. And by the way, you'll see a lot of people talk about cooling the motherboard. Don't cool the motherboard. It doesn't do anything. It's aesthetic, but even then you can screw it up. Go with the simplest design you can. Mount a cooler to the CPU. Don't cool the motherboard. You can mount a cooler to the RAM. It doesn't do anything for you because you're doing this really small voltage tuning that's just pointless. Cool your graphics card. Cool your motherboard. Really, if you're going to cool your RAM, you're doing it for aesthetic purposes only. But I have a tower called the Level 20 HT, and I bought this tower explicitly because it vertically mounts the GPU. The GPU does not cause GPU drag against the motherboard, which I know a lot of people talk about GPU drag. I know if you know about this, Coop, but they say that computers are designed with GPU drag in mind. But with the vertical mounting, I avoid the GPU drag. And I have a DD5 pump. Coop, how much do you know about liquid cooling?
I have looked at liquid cooling. It's not something I've done yet. I do agree. You gotta focus on your major outputs of heat, which is going to be CPU, GPU. You don't need the liquid cool RAM. I mean, as you said, the voltage. It's just not necessary. The motherboard. I don't think they're pumping out anything with that crazy of a Northbridge, Southbridge situation these days. But
no, the heat sinks on the chips themselves are fine. You do not have to mount a motherboard cooler.
I would say the only contraindication for that would be in certain motherboard designs, they just really badly design the Southbridge, Northbridge. If you look at your motherboard and somewhere on the motherboard, separate from CPU, GPU, you have a heatsink with an actual fan, and sometimes they just put like a 30, 40 millimeter fan on it.
Oh, yeah.
That would be worth considering, but otherwise, yeah, it's not worth it.
So the cheapest I would say you can liquid cool a PC for. You can get a radiator for about $80 if you're doing a 240 millimeter radiator, and then you can get 2 fans for about $20 if you're getting decent fans. So $100 for the radiator and the 2 fans. And then I don't know too many pump reservoir combos that sell for less than $100. So I mean, if you went with, I'm trying to remember who I went with. It's like written here on the side, but I can't. EKWB. I went with EK water blocks because they're really good for first time liquid coolers. So you get a pump. You're already at $200 right there just for the radiator, the 2 fans, and the pump. And then you have to get the couplings. And I think for the couplings, it's 2 couplings for the radiator, 2 couplings for the reservoir, 2 couplings for the CPU, 2 couplings for the GPU, and that's 8 couplings. Each coupling is about $8, by the way. So you're looking at right there. You're at $60 if you're being conservative about it. So $260 for the coupling, the radiator, the fans, and the reservoir. And then you got the tubing. The tubing's cheap if you don't do rigid tubing, which is going to spike your price like nobody's business. If you don't do rigid tubing and you do soft tubing, you can get the tubing you need for $10. Well, then comes the mounts, and the mounts themselves are about $100 for the CPU and about $150 for the GPU. So you're looking at $250 there plus what did I say? $260. So the cheapest you can liquid cool a computer is about $500 after you include extra coupling so you can drain it and then the coolant fluid itself. So liquid cooling's $500, cheapest method possible. And I did that. I think I spent about $700 when everything was said and done. And because the vertical climb of my computer, these DD5 pumps, they're not very big. I mean, you know what the DD5 pumps are, right, Coop?
I haven't dealt with them, to be honest.
They're the universal pump for all liquid cooling.
Okay.
The DD5 pump, it can push, and you look at the numbers. When you're worried about cooling your computer, what you should be most worried about is if the pump can get pressure to all the components in the line. A lot of people are like, oh, do I get a separate reservoir for the GPU and the CPU? You don't really need it because water doesn't like to change the temperature of itself that often. You can have everything on a 1-point loop on your radiator and everything with 240 millimeters of radiation, or with radiator room. Great, wonderful. But with me, my computers have vertical. So part of my GPU doesn't get coolant fluid to it because it's sitting vertical, and the pump has to go through the radiator, the CPU, the pump, and the GPU. So I see this. I can actually look at my computer right now, and I can see this tiny little stream hop over the GPU block because it just has to get enough pressure to jump over this part. But then the top 25% of my GPU isn't cooling.
Oh, man.
And I'm on a Radeon 7, so I'm staring at this thing so do you have an expiration date I need to know about, buddy?
I felt that way with computer hardware. Some stuff will just run for 10 years, and other stuff it's just 2 years old and it just dies.
Yeah, it's just the Radeon 7 was a stillborn. I bought it because I was so excited to get a 1440p card from AMD, and then it EOL'd 6 months later. They stopped doing driver support for it, I want to say back in February. And now it's just the 5700 XT on firmware alone is outperforming my Radeon 7. I'm like, no! I paid $700 for this thing. The other thing's $400, you monsters.
That's a crime.
It against humanity. So in any case, Coop, thank you for coming on. It's nice to talk tech with people. We'll bring you back. We'll talk more about user interface in the future. We might even actually get like Proto on board as well if you'd like. And we could just have an episode where we talk like the nightmare that is working IT and
Sounds
not
good.
airline food.
Airline food, airline seats, airline everything else. Yeah.
So Coop doesn't have a social media he wants us to link, but we appreciate you being on and being a specialist for this conversation, Coop. And you know what? We'll see you in the future.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. See you next time.